Hi, my name's Tony Morrow, and this is Introduction to Project Management. Risk. It's a term that can cause anxiety, stress, and concern over negative outcomes. Or it can spark excitement and enthusiasm over new opportunities for positive outcomes. At its core, risk is uncertainty of outcome, and when it comes to project management, we can plan and manage uncertainty. Project risk management includes the processes of conducting risk management, planning, identification, analysis, response planning, response implementation, and monitoring risk on a project. Anything that changes your current state to a future state involves risk because it involves change. And based on that, every project is risky. Let's think about risk in two buckets. The first is individual project risk. Uncertain events or conditions that have a positive or negative effect on one or more project objectives. The second is overall project risk, the effect of uncertainty on the project as a whole. This can involve individual risk, multiple or cumulative risk, and the exposure of stakeholders to the consequences of variations in project outcome, positive or negative. Our job in planning for risk is to exploit or enhance opportunities, positive risks, and avoid or mitigate threats, negative risks. Risk can be based on events, a recession, a war, an accident, or a pandemic. The acute event creates uncertainty or risk of outcome or impact to the project. There are also non-event risks, variable risks, and ambiguity risks. Variable risk is the uncertainty around the characteristics around a planned event, activity, or decision. Productivity being above or below target, the number of errors found during testing, and of course, there's the weather. How many weddings or outdoor events are critically hinged on weather? Ambiguity risk is uncertainty about what might happen in the future. Areas where imperfect knowledge might affect the project's ability to achieve its objectives. To quote Donald Rumsfeld, these are unknown unknowns. Creating our plans, building in flexibility and adaptability to address unknown unknowns is known as project resilience. This can include enough budget and schedule contingency for emergent risks and a separate budget for known risks. Flexibility and adaptable processes that can cope with emergent risk while maintaining course towards our goal. Empowering your project team with clear objectives and trust to get the job done within the agreed upon limits. Frequent review of tripwires or early indicators of emergent risk, and clear input from stakeholders to clarify areas where scope or strategy can be adjusted in response to risk. How we manage risk depends on the project because each project is unique. How big is your project? How complex? What is the importance or priority of your project? What approach are you using? Is it waterfall, which is what we're describing in this series, where risk can be dealt with sequentially, one after another, or iteratively? Or are you using an agile approach where risk is addressed at the start of each iteration or sprint, as well as during the execution? Agile works well in highly uncertain, changing, or variable environments because of the building block approach and frequent reviews of incremental work in cross-functional teams. It increases the situational awareness of the team, and the understanding and knowledge of risk is accelerated. Let's plan some risk. Planning risk management is the process of defining how to conduct risk management activities for the project. For this, we'll need some inputs. Project charter, where we've already identified some high-level risk. Project management plan, documents such as a stakeholder register, and our best friends, Fs and OPAs. Now, our OPAs may have some documentation or other risk information already. It can include a risk policy, risk categories, maybe even a risk breakdown structure, templates, and lessons learned from previous projects. With these references in hand, we'll tap into expert judgment. This could include certified risk management professionals or others familiar with risk in our industry or business or project type, Add in some data analysis and meetings with your team, stakeholders, and sponsors, and you can create the plan. When your plan is complete, you can have some or all of the following elements. A risk strategy, which is a general approach to risk. The methodology, as in the tools, the data sources, and the approach being used. Roles and responsibilities. Funding, including contingencies and management reserves. Timing. How often will the risk management process be performed throughout the project, and inclusion into the schedule. Risk categories, common ways to structure risk, perhaps as a risk breakdown structure. Stakeholder risk appetite and or tolerance, shown in key thresholds, and a definition of risk probability and impact. Probability and impact matrix or heat map, and reporting formats, tracking, etc. Before we continue, and in an effort to avoid repeating myself, freezing your attention in a carbonite bath like Han Solo, see Empire Strikes Back, let me map out what happens next. We are going to identify risks, both individual and overall, while documenting their characteristics. We will perform a qualitative and quantitative risk analysis of those risks and then plan the risk responses. We could really lose ourselves down the rabbit hole in this process, and that may be appropriate for some large, complex projects involving millions or billions of dollars. But for our purposes in this course, we'll keep it high speed, low drag, and walk through the looking glass instead of following a rabbit who can't manage time. See Alice in Wonderland. Identifying risks involves the following inputs. The risk management plans for requirements, schedule, cost, quality, resources, and our risk management plan, which we just finished. We will also need baselines for scope, schedule, and cost. Our project documents, including assumptions log, cost estimates, duration estimates, issues log, lessons learned, required documentation, as in our requirements, resource requirements, stakeholder register, and any agreements that we have in place. Additionally, procurement documentation and our BFFs, Fs, and Opus. As before, with our references in hand, we can use expert judgment, data gathering through brainstorming, checklists, and interviews, analyze our data through root cause analysis, assumptions and constraint analysis, SWOT analysis, and document analysis. Root cause analysis, sometimes referred to as a fishbone diagram, is a method of identifying a symptom or outcome and deconstructing that outcome into its various causes, ending with a root cause. If I gained weight over Christmas, which is the symptom or outcome, it's because I ate more and exercised less. Specifically, I had more chocolate, cookies, and pie than I should have. And I was lazy. I didn't exercise. Therefore, in that very simple root cause analysis, I gained weight because I was lazy, ate too many high calories, didn't exercise. Assumptions and constraint analysis is a critical look at the assumptions for the project in the assumptions log and the correlating constraints. Think of it as a if this, then what type scenario. How valid are the ifs, and what are the impacts of the what? This can help identify risks and opportunities by controlling constraints or limiting factors. A SWOT analysis is a technique that identifies strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Usually depicted as a 4-quadrant matrix, strengths and weaknesses stem from internal sources to the project or organization, and opportunities and threats arise from outside the project or organization, but may be mitigated or exaggerated by the strengths and weaknesses. Document analysis is a review of the plans, assumptions, constraints, previous project documents, contracts, and technical documents. Is the technical specification on the edge of your capability? Can you only meet the processing timeline with 100% attendance or productivity? Did the last project like this fail or succeed? And what were their lessons learned? Informed by our expert judgment, data and analysis, and through meetings focused on risk, we will be able to produce a risk register and a risk report. The risk register captures details of identified individual project risks. This can include a list of identified risks, described in enough detail to ensure an unambiguous understanding, potential risk owners, that's the person responsible for monitoring the risks and for selecting and implementing an appropriate risk response strategy, list of potential risk responses. Identified risks are listed and added when we plan our risk response. Now, whereas our risk register identifies individual risks, the risk report presents info on sources of overall risk. This report will be added to and with our quantitative and qualitative analysis, that's coming up next, and plan risk response process. So this report provides sources of overall project risk with insight on the drivers of overall risk exposure, a summary of information of individual project risks, such as the number of them, the categories and metrics and trends around those risks. Now, before we move on, we need to update our assumption log, putting in new assumptions that may have now been identified. We have to update our issue log with new issues that have been uncovered and our lessons learned register. Now we're getting into qualitative risk. Our qualitative risk analysis is the process of prioritizing individual project risks for further analysis or action by assessing their probability of occurrence and impact, as well as other characteristics. This can be subjective, as it is based on the perception of risk. This can introduce bias in assessing the risk, and significant effort should be made in correcting for it. After all, the Empire lost not one, but 2 Death Stars based on the bias of overconfidence and underestimating the rebels. See Star Wars and Return of the Jedi. A qualitative risk analysis should be performed at various stages throughout the project lifecycle, as laid out in the risk management plan. To perform a qualitative risk analysis, we need some inputs: a risk management plan, project documents including our assumptions log, our risk register, stakeholder register, and our BFFs, Fs, and OPAs. With our references in hand, we will apply our expert judgment and data analysis. Specifically, how confident are we about our data on risks? What is the probability and impact assessment of identified risks? What other factors should we be considering with prioritizing risk? Urgency, proximity of risk to impact, dormancy, or time before the impact is discovered from a risk, manageability, controllability, detectability, or how easily is the risk recognized, connectivity, how related is one risk to other risks, strategic impact, and propinquity. That's a word you don't hear every day. It's the degree to which a risk is perceived to matter to one or more stakeholders. Where a risk is perceived as significant, propinquity is high. Factoring all this, we categorize the risks. Using our risk breakdown structure and our work breakdown structure, we can group our risks based on a root cause analysis, cost, impact, or which phase of the project they will actualize, or other criteria that we deem appropriate. Using various techniques, we can represent this information in our heat map, flow charts, or bubble charts. Bubble charts show a combination of proximity and detectability along X and Y axes, with the bubbles presenting on the table. The size of the bubble corresponds to the impact of the risk. Once we've completed this analysis, we will need to update our assumptions log, issues log, and risk register with new information that updates the probability and impact of risks and owners that may change as a result. The risk report as well, reflecting changes to the most important individual risks and the priority of them. Now it's time for our quant, or quantitative risk analysis. This is a process of numerically analyzing the combined effect of identified project risks and other sources of uncertainty on overall project objectives. Essentially, we're putting numbers to it. To start, we'll need the following inputs: risk management plan, scope baseline, schedule baseline, cost baseline, and some project documents: the assumptions log, basis of estimates, cost estimates, cost forecast, duration estimates, our milestone list, resource requirements, risk register, risk report, schedule forecasts, and our best buds, Fs and OPAs. With these references in hand, we will add our expert judgment. In this case, those who can take our sources of uncertainty and translate it into numerical inputs. Those who can pick the right model, technique, and tool to output the kind of quantitative data that we need. There are several ways to display and analyze this kind of data. Simulations allow us to factor in various impacts of risk. A Monte Carlo analysis or simulation is one method of being able to appreciate the likelihood and impact of potential risk. A sensitivity analysis, sometimes called a tornado diagram, represents a correlation coefficient between risks and the influence on project outcome. Essentially, how strong is the relationship between the risk and impact on outcome? A decision analysis is a network diagram that displays alternative courses of action. Each path or branch of the tree shows a decision node, course of action A versus course of action B, and then a chance node that indicates the probability of outcomes and the expected monetary value of the output. Influence diagrams are a graphical aid similar to a mind map that show or illustrate relationships between decisions, uncertainties, and outputs. In this diagram, rectangles represent decisions, ovals, uncertainties, and diamonds, the values of outputs. The arrows just show relationships of influence, not dependencies. Once we've completed our quantitative analysis, we should have some or all of the following: an assessment of overall risk exposure divided into two key aspects, chances of project success or achieve the key objective, degree of variability and the range of potential outcomes, as well as detailed probabilistic analysis of the project, diagrams, S-curves, tornado diagrams with critical analysis, determining the amount of contingency needed for certain levels of confidence, identify risk with greatest effect on the critical path, major drivers of overall risk and influence on uncertainty on project outcomes, and in addition, prioritize list of individual project risks, trends in quantitative risk analysis results, and recommended risk responses. Take a deep breath. Okay, we have one more to go. This part of planning risk has a lot of moving parts. I've referenced many tools, tables, and techniques that are probably going over your head right now. I don't expect you to know how to create a Monte Carlo simulation, or a tornado diagram, or conduct a SWOT analysis, or root cause analysis. I'm introducing these terms and ideas so that when you encounter them in your work, you have some context of what they are and how they fit into the process. In our facilitation sessions, I can share some examples and references and additional information if you want to dive deeper. But for the purposes of this course, we're keeping it high speed, low drag. Future courses will allow us to dive deeper, but that's not for today. Next step, and our final step today, is planning risk response. Plan risk response is the process of developing options, selecting strategies, and agreeing on actions to address overall project risk exposure as well as to treat individual project risks. This process fundamentally takes everything up to now on risk and forces us to come up with a plan to deal with it. Our risk responses need to be appropriate for the significance of the risk, be cost-effective, realistic, and agreed to by those involved, and owned by a responsible person. A fallback or contingency plan can be developed as an implemented risk response. In this case, secondary risks should be identified resulting from the implementation of the risk response. To start this off, we'll need some inputs. Our resource management plan, our risk management plan, cost baseline, and some project documents, including lessons learned register, project schedule, project team assignments, resource calendars, risk register, risk report, stakeholder register, and our friends Fs and OPAs. With these references in hand, we will add our expert judgment, usually those with training or experience in threat and opportunity response strategies, contingency and overall risk response strategies. Including our data from our qualitative and quantitative processes, we'll meet with our team, experts, stakeholders, and sponsors to come up with strategies. In general, there are 5 strategies for dealing with threats or negative risks. Avoid, and this is when we work to eliminate the threat or protect from the impact of the threat. Transfer. Transfer, as in shifting ownership from the threat to a third party so that they can manage the risk and bear the impact. Think of insurance as a good example of this. Accept. Acknowledge the existence of the threat, but don't take any proactive action to deal with it. Mitigate, as in we are going to take action to reduce the probability of the threat occurring or reduce its impact. Escalate. When the team and or the sponsor agree that a threat is outside the scope of a project, these threats are managed at the program or portfolio level. In the context of opportunities, we apply some of the same strategies, just in reverse. Instead of avoid, we'll exploit. Here we hope to proactively capture the benefit of an opportunity by increasing the probability of it occurring. Instead of transfer, we share. We transfer ownership of the opportunity to a third party that enjoys some of the benefit if the opportunity occurs. Instead of mitigate, we enhance. A strategy to increase the probability and impact of the opportunity. And of course, we still accept the opportunities with no action taken or escalate by having the program or portfolio manager manage these outcomes. In managing this decision, we may need to make some changes to the project baselines, in which case a formal change request will have to be generated and managed through a formal change request process. With our risk responses planned, we will have potential updates for our scope management plan, cost management plan, quality management plan, resource management plan, procurement management plan, and baselines for scope, schedule, cost, and updates for documents including the assumption log, the cost forecast, lessons learned register, project schedule, project team assignments, risk register, and risk report. In today's lesson, we covered a lot. We defined and discussed plan risk management. We identified risks and discussed root cause, assumption and constraints, SWOT and document analysis. We performed qualitative risk analysis, including risk parameters, heat maps, probability and impact matrix, and bubble charts. We performed quantitative risk analysis, including simulations like Monte Carlo analysis, tornado diagrams, decision tree analysis, and we planned risk responses, including the 5 strategies for threats and opportunities. In the next episode, we'll discuss procurement.